Very good afternoon to all of you present here. As you all know, our guest speaker for today is Mr. Gautam Muralidharan. Gautam is a partner with PwC US firm. He operates primarily within the advisory line of service, where he currently focuses on managing the strategy through execution of large-scale cybersecurity transformations at several Fortune 100 companies. Gautam works out of Minneapolis, US, and it's an honor for the class that he has taken time out of his vacation to come down to Bangalore just to address the class. I had the opportunity of working with him directly in one of the PwC assignments, and ever since I have been a fan. Gautam not only has great technical skills, he's a great business leader too. I remember having absolute freedom of ideas and innovation, and yet feeling completely protected and looked after as an associate when I was working with him. I think he's an ocean of virtues, and I hope that we can catch on to some in this seminar today. Over to you, Gautam. I request you all to please give a huge round of applause to Gautam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Heavy lunch? Let's try again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Wonderful. Thank you again for having me here. Karishma gave a very generous and inflated introduction. I think about 5% of that is true. So why don't we actually do a real introduction, right, of who I am and what I do. So Gautam Muralidharan. So I grew up in Chennai, here in India for about 21 years, and then I went to the US to do my master's in engineering. Was there for about 3 years. I was at the University of Maryland. I did electrical and computer engineering, and it's got nothing to do with what I do now. Graduated, and then been with PwC ever since. What I do at PwC is a wide variety of things. Now I focus on cybersecurity, but primarily had a technology background, so would do technology consulting across the board with Fortune 100 companies, etc. I live in Minneapolis, which is like a small city by Chicago. It's really, really cold. It was quite the transformation for me from Chennai to move there, but I've loved it ever since, and have been there for about 13 years now. So once again, thank you so much for having me here today. One of the first things I struggled with when Karishma told me that she wanted me to come out here and talk to you guys was I didn't know what to talk to you about, right? I mean, I was sitting there and I was thinking about, should I talk to them about cyber? Should I talk to them about technology? Should I talk to them about myself? And then what I decided was the random streams of thoughts that I was having will probably mesh it together so that you can have something sensible come out of it. So what we will have today is sort of a consulting pulp fiction, right? So we will talk about different things, and the idea is that they will all come together at the end. And by no means am I saying that you wait till the very end to ask me questions, etc. So please feel free to raise your hand and talk to me. One thing I would request is when you do ask a question, if you could say your name, because I can't look at all the name cards all the way to the background, so that I can get to know you guys. So some disclaimers before I get started. I am a partner at PwC, but let's not make PwC pay for the sins I'm about to commit, right, and things that I'm about to say. So in that vein, when I'm speaking for PwC, I'll make sure that I mention that. And odds are, most of the times, it's my personal opinion as a consultant who's been doing it for a while. The other thing is, I have sort of a confused Desi accent because it's neither here nor there. And if you feel like I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, just raise your hand, and I'm happy to repeat it. The other thing is, just questions, right? I mean, like I said, you don't have to wait till the very end to ask me questions. You can just raise your hand, and we can take it somewhere. This is especially important because, being a consultant, you have the good or bad fortune of serving out several death sentences to your clients and colleagues through PowerPoint, and I have done that shamelessly. So I've tried to keep this presentation pretty light. There isn't a lot of text on the screen that you can read. The idea is to have an interactive conversation, which I hope we can, all right? So that being said, let's jump right in. So what do I want to do today? So first part is, it's no secret my background is consulting. So that's what I've done. Been at a Big Four for about 13 years now. As a partner, as a staff, as a middle-level manager. I've had exposure to a wide variety of people. I've been fortunate to work with talented people such as your classmate, Karishma here, and I've learned quite a bit. So what I can share with you are certain nuggets around how the business of consulting in my mind works. And again, this is not a primer on consulting. I'm sure that you guys already know what it is. And so we can talk a little bit about what is happening right now in the area of consulting. So that's the first part. The second part is, I think what consultants cherish and are very responsible for doing is solving problems. Not saying that others don't do that in industry or otherwise, but consulting, a big part is solving problems. So when you're trying to solve problems, you have to solve different kinds of problems. How do you find the right problems to solve? So we'll talk a little bit about that and my hypothesis around finding the right problems to solve. We will also talk about what PwC thinks are the right problems to solve. And I think there was some questions from the class around, where do you think the business is going in America? What are people doing, et cetera? And we can talk briefly about that. The third part is, few lessons learned that I have. In these 13 years, I have screwed up so many times, I've lost count. And so we can talk about, some of the mistakes I have made, some of the lessons I have learned, and, have a discussion around that as well. So that's it. Very simple, 3 things. And hopefully, I hope to wrap all of this in about 50 to 55 minutes. I believe, there's Q&A after that. We can have a conversation, during and after. Part of it is also that, given I'm a consultant, take that timeline with a grain of salt. I don't know if it's going to take 15 minutes or 2 hours, so we'll try that. The other piece of that is there's some fine print here too, right? I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I know everything. There's a lot of, there'll be some shameless self-promotion baked in. It's part of the deal. You're going to have to deal with it. If it was a darker room, you should have probably gotten a seat towards the end so you can sneak out. But guess what? You're stuck here with me. So there will be some of that stuff. The idea is to balance that Kool-Aid versus what is actually real. So that's the plan for today. Any questions, comments around that before I begin? All right, wonderful. So how many of you here want to go into consulting? Just show of hands. All right, cool. Curious, how many of you came from a consulting background? All right, so, I accidentally stumbled into consulting. I was a nerd, I still am. And I used to write a lot of software. I enjoyed it. I did not anticipate to becoming a consultant. I didn't know what it was. A lot of my friends worked for prestigious consulting companies. It was nice to hear about it, but I never really cared much for it. So I actually stumbled into consulting, and I fell in love with that. And now I've been a consultant for almost 13 years. So what I would tell you is that in my time as a consultant, so PwC does this very interesting leadership program. It's called Genesis Spark, where PwC grabs a whole bunch of high-performing senior managers and they send them off. And so you sit together in a room like this for 6 to 8 weeks in Netherlands, and then you try to discover what you're passionate about, et cetera. So as I was looking at people from different backgrounds and what they did, consulting boils down to 3 things. You're selling one of these 3 things. There's nothing else that you can sell that is not a combination of these things. So you're either selling expertise, you're selling experience, or you're selling efficiency. And we'll talk about these 3 things, right? So expertise is, saying, look at me, I'm special, I'm really good at something, I have spent the better part of a lifetime understanding this subject area, so I'm best equipped to advise you on these matters. Experience is more saying, we have done this for a while. We can come in and actually help you solve a problem pretty quickly. Because we've not solved this exact problem, but we've solved something like this for a pretty long time, so we're capable of solving this problem pretty quickly as well. Third part is efficiency, right? Which is basically saying, we can do it quicker, we can do it cheaper, we can do it faster. Pick your adjective, right? So any of the consulting houses you take will fall into one of these buckets. Obviously, there's some overlap, right? It's not a strict line. It depends on the business model of the consulting company. So for example, if you take McKinsey, they operate strictly in the expertise area, right? They say we pride on bringing people in who are experts in their domain, and I'm going to market those people. It is not so much about marketing the firm. Yes, there is a certain reputation that McKinsey carries, but it's more about the fact that Clinton's daughter is at McKinsey, or Harvard MBAs are at McKinsey, or people from IIMB are at McKinsey. So it is about marketing people. Now, if you take somebody else, like a Deloitte, they're saying, look at us, we're Deloitte. We've done this for so long, and we have done this with large teams that we are capable of doing this again and again and again. And so hire us, and that's working. In those cases, they're selling the brand. They're selling, the teams. The third part is efficiency, right? If you take a lot of the technology Indian consulting companies like Infosys, et cetera, they operate in this space. So the idea is that you're saying that I have tools to make processes faster, quicker, better. You're marketing the tools. The people are important, but not as significant as the tools and process that have been identified and efficiencies that have been identified over a period of time. Now, why is this primer important, right? You could, you guys can figure this out yourself. I think this is important because as you guys decide to go out to lead a consulting career, it's important to pick one of these things or understand which one lines up best with you. So oftentimes, people come to me and people who have been on my team, they're frustrated about being consultants. And I think the biggest gap is that, where you are an efficiency expert and you want to be an expert, or you are an expert and you are in an efficiency firm. And so that is one thing for you to consider. The second thing is this class, regardless of whether you're in a consulting or otherwise, you have to understand the value that every consulting company brings in every single one of these pillars, right? And that's important because, sometimes there is class warfare that happens, and a certain brand is more prestigious than something else, and that's absolutely not true. So if you think from an even-keeled mind, if you're a technology leader or a business leader in a company, if you understand the problems that they face, they will tell you that every single company has a role. So don't worry so much about how prestigious something is, because the meaning that it has is the meaning that you attach to it. Worry about what your strengths are and how you can play up your strengths in one of these areas. Not doing so is not a death sentence. You might still be able to succeed, but it's against the grain of who you are. So that's something to think about. So the other thing is one of the questions I think that came from the class was about how do you sell, right? So in my 13 years at PwC, I stopped being a hands-on technologist. So I do still stay close to technology, but I would say I stopped being a technologist about 6-7 years back, and I became a middle manager. So my job was managing engagements. My job was delivering value at clients, et cetera. So when I made the choice was a very conscious choice, right? I told myself, I enjoy managing people. I enjoy building teams, and that is what I'm going to go do. And so I stopped being hands-on. I stopped writing code. I stopped configuring tools. I stopped going to technology training. But I was in touch with technology. I knew what was going on, but I was not a hands-on person. Now, as I look back as a partner, right, I think the fact that I was a technologist was very useful to me. And that's what I mean by your personal interlock, right? So in PwC, we have this concept called interlock. So you have P&Ls both horizontally and vertically. So there's a P&L by industry. So you have retailers, you have financial services, et cetera, people who specialize in these areas, and they build processes on them. And then there are like segment experts, right? So you might be a cyber expert. You might be a supply chain expert. Doesn't matter. But there is an intersection that happens between a retail expert and a supply chain expert. So you could be a retail supply chain expert. So those people tend to be the most valuable. So if you ask me who sells the most work, they are the people that sell the most work. And why do they sell the most work? Because they can speak the language of technology to a business leader or vice versa, right? Because most often where people stumble in that efficiency, expertise, and experience bucket is they're so siloed that they cannot have a conversation with somebody in the other bucket. So let's say, for example, right, now cybersecurity, if you take, it's a classic example of 10 years back, nobody cared about cyber. It was a back office problem. We were the police that walked around, securing stuff. They hated us. I mean, nobody liked cyber at all. And we were just an afterthought. Now, if you look at the kind of situation that we're in and the environment that we're in, cybersecurity is a front office topic. I'm in so many board meetings, I can't even keep track. And it is not that cybersecurity has changed. It's just that the gravitas and the importance that has been given to cyber has changed. Now, I have to adapt to that, and the conversations that I have with these boards have changed. I don't sit there and talk firewall. I don't sit there and talk penetration testing with them. I talk business problems. I talk to them about risk. I talk to them about impact to top line, bottom line, et cetera. So those are the people that make the most successful conversions, in my opinion. So what does that mean for you, right? So as you guys graduate from here and head out, you have to look back at your own experience and say, what is unique about yourself? So too often, what happens, unfortunately, in my opinion, is people try to hide their personal brand. They try to become somebody else because they want to fit in. And that is the absolute worst thing you could do. So when I was with my fellow class of partners who made it, every single person had a completely different background, just like this class, right? If I'm just going to pick people with blue shirts, then, well, guess what? You're going to have a class full of people with blue shirts. So diversity is very important, so do not try to silence your own personal brand and try to expand it. So if you're looking for opportunities to sell, make sure that your personal brand comes across and you're connecting dots in your own way. And if the system is not permitting that, maybe you're on the wrong system. And that is the other thing too. So most of the companies now are seeking diversity. They want you to amplify that difference, so make sure that you're doing that. Right. So this is probably pretty important. I'm sure a lot of consultants you talk about this. But this is probably the most important thing you could do as a consultant, right? My grandfather used to say, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. It happens every day, right? More often than ever, consultants get blamed for screwing projects up, breaking things and making things harder than they need to be. And I would argue that most often that criticism is duly warranted, right? So what does trust mean in this new environment? It means, I was riding up here and stuck in traffic. I saw this hoarding, and it said, the best way to build trust is to keep your promises. That's what it is. So in consulting, what I learned over the years is the tools that you will have here when you leave is great. But the more important thing is to make sure that you are building relationships. Consulting is about relationships. It's not about anything else. It's not about how smart you are, where you went to school, what you did. It is about the relationships that you have. And people give you work. People give you opportunities in companies, not just because of how incredible you are, but it's also because you can keep the promises that you make. So I think, if I look back and if I had one piece of advice I would give myself as a consultant is to be trustworthy. And so, as you guys leave here, there will be moments in your career, whether you're a consultant or otherwise, any kind of a manager, where you will be forced to make choices that contradict your values. Don't. And when you do so, you're starting to make compromises that will lead to a point where you're somebody else and you're not who you are. And when you're not genuine, people can see right through you. So any buyer, it'd be a middle manager or an executive all the way up to the CEO, they are looking for authentic personalities. So as a consultant, try to be trustworthy. And here's a quick story, right? So we were at a client. So they bid out the project, and we won it, and we were delivering it, and turned out that the scope was thrice as big as the project. So we were 30% in, and we had burned through 30% of the cash. It was a significant project, it was a 7-figure project. So we went up, and it was a government institution. And government here is not different from the government in the US, I can tell you that. There's a lot of people that have to come together to approve such projects, and they were not happy. And we went back and we told them, look, this is 3 times the scope. We didn't anticipate this, et cetera. So it quickly escalated all the way up to this guy who was working for the governor of the state that we were serving. And so I still remember, I was a young manager, second-year manager or so, and I was in the room with this guy who works for the governor of the state. And what I distinctly remember is, for whatever reason, I had the courage to say this was not going to work. This was not going to work. And this was not going to work. And every time I told people that, people got angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier, to the point I thought, this was it. I was going to get fired. This is the project that was going to do it for me. And then at the end, we go into this room with this very important guy, and we have this conversation. And he respected that. He paid all our bills. He made sure that PwC left the building unscathed. And we continued to do work with him. We stopped working for that gentleman that would not agree with us. But what I walked away from that moment is, that's how you build trust. So have courage, keep your promises, and it doesn't matter whether you consult or not, that's always valuable. All right, so this is, somebody asked about business acumen versus global acumen and all that. And so, every company, PwC is no different. We go through these iterations of building the perfect performance evaluation tool. And we joke about how the best performance tool is the tool that we are not using, right? And so the tool that we use measures consultants now across business, technical, global, acumen, relationships. And then we have something called a whole leadership dimension. Doesn't matter. And the reason why, I'm quite cynical about these things, and I'm very suspicious about most of these models that companies throw around, because they come up with something every 2 years. But this was pretty interesting, because this measures you as a person, not just at work, but outside as well. And if you're talking about being a consummate consultant, right? What does that mean? So a consummate consultant is somebody who is capable of building relationships. And I talked about the importance of building relationships earlier on, right? The significance of building relationships is actually being able to go out and build trust very quickly. And you will not have several meetings with a client. You will get 1 meeting or 2 meetings or 3 meetings. And that's the reality you guys will have once you come out of this place, is that realities change very quickly. They're not going to wait for you for more than a few minutes. So as a consummate consultant, your job is to do all of those things, whether it's building relationships, having global acumen, having business acumen, or technical acumen. So the answer to that question of what is the most important thing, all of them are, right? And it depends on the situation. The biggest mistake that people make is they think technical acumen trumps. Whatever your technical skill is, right? I'm not saying technical skills mean to write code, or you could be like I said, a supply chain expert, you could be an ERP person. It doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't. And the people that fail the most often at consulting companies are these people with very strong technical backgrounds who refuse to build any other acumen. And I've seen this on my own teams, and these are very intelligent people. You're talking about people, graduates of premier institutions, a lot of illustrious accomplishments, but they just won't budge, right? If you cannot have a conversation with a client, if you cannot build a relationship, you are completely useless to me. If you cannot interact with global companies, if you cannot talk to them about what's happening in China, India, et cetera, you're useless to me. If you cannot, for the life of you, to understand the business of the client and what you're doing and how it impacts the top or bottom line, you're worthless. And that is the reality of it, right? So don't worry about what PwC does or Deloitte does or McKinsey does or anybody else does. At the end of the day, the most valuable consultant is somebody who is evenly balanced across the board. And that follows you all the way up, right? Most of these consulting companies have similar admission process into the partnership, and they are not significantly different. And I can tell you that you will not become a partner unless you're balanced across the board. And more importantly, right, forget becoming a partner and all that. That's secondary. You will not be able to have a fulfilling career without being managers who are balanced across the board, consulting or not. And that is a reality. And I know that I might be telling you things that you already know. But as you guys walk out of this room, be mindful of that, right? Because the next time, a year from now, where you guys are important people in important companies and you're frustrated with the company and how they're not doing the fair thing, or how XYZ is so stupid and he got promoted and you should have been promoted, you're so great. Ask yourself if you're actually balanced across the board. Most often the answer is no. The other important thing is the consummate consultant does not look down on people that are lacking in certain areas, right? As a leader, it is quite shameful, that I have folks on my own team that sometimes there's class warfare. So either your business acumen is really high because you're the graduate of a prestigious management program, or your technical acumen is really high, and you're having class warfare in your team, and you're saying, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He just manages spreadsheets. I'm so cool. I build rockets every day. So that kind of stuff is going to ruin you as well. That is a big gap that I see. And I don't know if there is a book out there that talks about this, and I don't know if there is any Bible in these consulting companies that they publish, and they will tell you that, oh, if thou shalt do these things, otherwise you shall not make partner. But I will tell you that you will not succeed unless you're balanced across the board. So anyway, so that is real quick primer on what I think, and I'm keeping tabs on the time as well, so if I'm going too fast, please stop me. So, finding problems worth solving. So this is probably the most important thing you can do, consultant or otherwise, right? So, I'm going to try to wake you guys up. So, what do you think is the most valuable asset? Okay? Okay? I'm sorry? Relationships, I had something.
Skills, experience,
Okay, good. There's nobody here saying money, so that's fantastic. So, you step forward. So, I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure this out because I had my ups and downs in my career, and I was like, I had my jaded phases where I said, no, this PwC just sucks. I'm going to go do something else. Billionaire or millionaire or whatever, take your pick, right? So, as I was trying to I spent quite a bit of time trying to understand this. And this is fairly important because whatever you decide, so time was what I came up with. Attention is another thing, experience, they're all good answers. It's about whatever you think is your most important asset, that's what you're going to try to accumulate, right? And counterintuitively, that's the asset that will run out the most quickly. And the reason why that's important is because whatever you decide is the most important thing in your life, whether you like it or not, will dictate the DNA of your life, whether it's professional or otherwise. So the kind of problems you pick and choose to solve will decide the fate of your career. It's your choice, and that's important. So let's quickly talk about what PwC thinks is important, right? So I tried to stay away from PwC Kool-Aid, so this is a little bit more about, I think, something that will be valuable for you guys. So among several things that PwC does, it's very good at taking surveys, right? So these guys went off and talked to a whole bunch of CEOs, I think about 500 or 600, and we're talking in the Fortune 500 companies, right? So they talked to all of these guys globally, and they said, what do you think are the things that are actually changing the world, right? And they came up with 5 megatrends. And I would not worry too much about, worrying that you don't have this content. You can just go Google PwC megatrends and you'll find all this stuff. So they came up with 5 things. And these are the 5 things. So the first one is demographic and social change, which is basically the fact that, believe it or not, by 2025 we would have added another 1 billion people on this planet. And we're not just adding 1 billion people on this planet, we're actually adding a whole bunch of people in the workforce as well. People are not dying as quickly, and people are having fewer children. So what that means is the population segment that's growing the most rapidly is 65 plus. So which means there is tremendous amount of strain on infrastructure, tremendous amount of strain on the healthcare system, et cetera, that we did not anticipate. So that's trend number 1. There are other demographic and social changes as well in terms of, if you take specific continents, for example, if you take Africa, what they noticed was that the younger population in Africa that is actually entering the workforce is nearly tripled. And why is this important? Because all those people need to do something with their lives, right? They have this huge amount of infrastructure projects that are going on in Africa. They're probably going to export this talent. So immigration of African talent is going to be a huge thing that happens over the next 10 years. So something is happening there. The second thing is something that you guys are well aware of in this room. There's a huge shift in global economic power. So it is anticipated that in 10 years, the E7, as they call it, will overtake the G7 in terms of purchasing power. So E7 is the emerging economies. So us, Brazil, Russia, China, etc., will overtake, more significant economies like the traditional ones. the middle class here in Asia has already overtaken the size of the middle class in the rest of the world. So between the US and UK, their middle class is much smaller than the middle class that exists in the US. And the reason why that is important is because the purchasing power has shifted as well, right? So this is no longer an exporter of talent, this is actually now a market. So that's why you guys have so many companies and so many brands targeting so many things that you guys know. So this is another major shift, because one thing that we are anticipating is there'll be at least one major executive, and we define a major executive as an SVP and above, in all of the Fortune 100 companies that will be based out of Asia, right? And we're not talking about the Indian head of some company, we're talking about an executive that's actively involved in the management of the business. The third thing is urbanization. It's not new to India, but it's sort of new to the West and the rest of the world, is that 0.5% of the real estate of the world is actually consuming about 70% of the energy, right? So if you take cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, Shanghai, New York, people are flocking in the millions to these cities. As agriculture has become more mechanized and technology has overtaken, there are fewer people living in rural areas. So this presents both opportunities and challenges, in the sense that it's actually, the pendulum has swung the other way, where people now want to live in smaller apartments. They don't want to own cars. I mean, we've already seen a socioeconomic impact of this, which is the sharing economy. Right? You guys all use all Uber, whatever it is. Nobody wants to own anything because there is not enough to own. Climate change, this is probably the most important thing and the least important thing that people pay attention to, which is actually a tragedy. There is no question there is scientific evidence that the climate is being altered in several significant ways, and if nothing else, resources are stagnant. So if you think about the non-traditional form of resources like water, etc., they are rapidly depleting, and the question becomes, how do we manage those issues? Last but not the least is the technology breakthroughs, which is self-evident. I mean, so to get a telephone to 50% of the world's population took about 72 years. To get a smartphone took 10 years. Gene splicing costed about $70 million 10 years back. It costs about $6,000 now. So technology is obviously changing dramatically, and it's creating ripple effects. Now, why are these megatrends important, right? I mean, by themselves, they're obvious, right? I mean, but what is interesting is, at the intersection of these megatrends, when they actually collide, is where we think very, very interesting things happen. So I'll give you a few examples from clients of my own that you guys might find interesting. Thanks. This was a very, very cool scenario. So we had a client in China, actually in Brazil, and we were talking to them about some technology transformation. And what we noticed was they had a huge uptick in their soy exports. So the amount of soy that they were exporting was just really, really, really high. And so they were trying to understand why that was the case, right? I mean, so that they could do more of it, so that they could sell more soy. And so the biggest consumer of soy was China, which is primarily an agricultural nation. So they have plenty of weather, resource, and situational realities that can allow growing soy. They grow a lot of soy. And it was fascinating to the Brazilians why these guys were doing that, why the Chinese were actually exporting all this soy over there. Turns out, they were not trying to arbitrage soy, they were arbitraging water. They didn't want to spend the water to grow the soy, so they wanted the Brazilians to do it, because they valued water more than the amount it would take to import soy. So at the intersection of the global power shifting and climate change happening, these new powers like India and China have to deal with the realities of the fact that they can't create these resources. And so they're brokering these resources in such a way that they're arbitraging it. So the problems that are being solved right now is around water arbitrage, not so much around oil, like the rest of the world thinks. So that was one interesting example. The other one was smart cities, right? So which is not new to you guys. I know Bangalore has its own initiative and everybody. So the reason why smart cities are important now is they've got too many people and not enough city personnel to actually interact with them. I mean, state governments our prediction is they will slowly become defunct, I mean, nobody's going to care so much about state governments other than the political parties themselves. City governments will become more powerful and stronger because most of you guys are living in cities now. You're not living, there's not enough votes in the suburbs. Now, if you look at smart cities, the kind of IoT deployment and the kind of smart buildings that are coming up are just staggering. Infrastructure-wise, the kind of spend that is being planned is in the trillions. And it's quite fascinating the kind of problems it presents. Last but not the least, which is my area, which is trust, right? So there's a lot of social change. I mean, I'm pretty old. I don't know if there are millennials in the class. So with millennials entering, the purchasing power segment along with, the technology breakthroughs that are happening, having access to a lot of technology, there's significant trust gaps. So somebody asked, what is the future of cybersecurity? The future is bright, but it is less about fear, right? I mean, everybody wants to talk about whether they've breached, and they think that's the conversation we have. But if you take the more experienced security executives that I talk to, people who have been doing this for a while, they will tell you that they hate the fear conversation. They hate people telling them that they're going to get breached and the environments are not secure. That's the worst possible conversation you can have. Instead, the better conversation that they prefer is about, how are you helping me build trust into my brand so that I can turn around and sell it to the customer, right? So for example, healthcare is very obvious. So you guys are surrendering a whole bunch of your data to healthcare companies. And so if healthcare companies can make trust a part of their brand and they're turning around and they're telling you guys, you know what, if you buy healthcare from me, you're not just buying state-of-the-art healthcare services at affordable prices, but you're actually keeping your data safe in the process, that becomes a part of your brand. And so that is another kind of intersection problems that we're trying to solve. Now, again, right, none of this is actually very important. In my opinion, what is important is for you guys to think about these 5 things and say, what problems do you guys feel like are important to you? And the reason why I asked the question about what do you think is the most important asset to you, and some people say time, experience, etc., is whatever is your most important asset, where are you going to spend it, right? Are you going to graduate, and are you going to take the most lucrative job, which could also be your most passionate interest, which is fine, or are you going to do something that actually amplifies the problems that you wish and intend to solve? Because guess what, 10 years from now when you turn around and look at this day and you just chose to decide, your life is going to get dictated by the kind of problems you choose to solve. And there are plenty of problems to solve. The 5 that I talked about are the ones that are getting a lot of funding, getting a lot of attention, and a lot of boardrooms and companies are talking about. By no means am I saying that they are the 5 most important problems that can be solved. It's just an example of what actually sells now and what is interesting to people right now. Okay? All right, last piece, and then we can get to questions. So, this is a little bit of self-promotion, self-reflection, so you guys can nod off if you need to. But, when I graduated and, when I was applying for jobs, and, I had a perception of reality which is rather skewed. And, I am exaggerating here for effect, but, you think that there is this linchpin that you will topple, and then it just takes off, right? And there is no looking back. It's cars, it's houses, it's whatever you dreamt of, and everything happens. Guess what? It doesn't. It never does. It doesn't matter how bright you are. It doesn't matter how many things you have going for you. Life will bring you to your knees, right? And that's the reality of what success landed up looking like. And it is fascinating because I was trying to plot this, and there was no mathematical way for me to plot it. I could not find anything linear to do it, so I just literally scribbled something and I came up with this. So I'll just talk about a couple of examples just to give you some insight. I'm dyslexic, so I was diagnosed as dyslexic when I was 7 years old, and you're talking about India in the 1980s, and my dad and mom were terrified of me going to special schools and so on. So there was no medication and stuff, and so I had to figure out compensation strategies to deal with it. it was very hard, just reading textbooks was a nightmare, words would get jumbled up. And competitive exams were like cancer for me because, you're sitting under pressure and you're trying to like A, B, C, D, and you don't know what A is, what B is, and it's terrifying. So, but what landed up happening was working through dyslexia was probably the single most important thing that I did in my life when I look back, and it was the lowest point in my life too. As I look back now, because I have tools in my arsenal that most people cannot have and will not have because they cannot imagine a reality where you have to deal with a state of mind that does that to you. High point was, funny story of how I got hired into PwC. So I graduated in 2004. So I came to the US August 2001, and then 9/11 happened. So, and then 2004, a whole bunch of people got laid off when Enron and WorldCom happened. So what was fascinating was the market was flooded with engineers, and they had about 40,000 telecom engineers, and I was an electrical engineering major. So I interviewed at 42 companies. So you can literally name any brand you want. And I went probably to them, like Microsoft, Adobe. I even went to like a mom and shop technology company that had like 4 people. Even they wouldn't take me. So, it was quite fascinating. And then I landed up at PwC, right? But, as I'm sure you guys have seen what Steve Jobs has said, but you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And, it's important because what it did for me is it landed me at PwC, and I absolutely love what I do. But more importantly, right, when I look back, there's no way I could have built the kind of resilience I did without having gone through those kinds of moments. And the other important thing is, it's not so much that you guys don't know this. You all know this. There's a reason why you're here. You're all pretty resilient and successful in your own ways. And you failed several times to be successful. But the hard part is being mindful, right? So here I am, hey, I've conquered dyslexia, interviewed 42 times, really strong, and I got deferred in the partner process last year. So, and I was angry, I was like punching walls, and I was doing this and that. And I didn't say, oh, you know what, I'm going to be zen. These things happen, I'm going to be successful. I didn't do that. I just was obnoxious to be around. It was difficult to be who I was. And what I realized, right, when I look back now, is it is easy to have the tools that you have, but being mindful to can choose these tools and use them at the right time is very, very difficult. And that is a skill you guys have to work on. It is not so much that you guys are not capable of handling adversity. It's more important that you have to remember to tackle adversity. That makes sense, right? In the moment, are you saying to yourself, all right, it's fine, I'll pass it. It's just this weird squiggly line that will correct itself. Or are you going to throw a fit, right? And I think, that was an important moment for me because, once I realized that I had to be more mindful in terms of using the tools that I have accumulated over my career, I became a better person, better professional, etc. The other important thing here is, I think, given the fact that you guys just hit it out of the park with the asset question, none of you guys said millions and millions of dollars, I'm assuming that you have different ways of defining success, which is very important, right? Before you leave, think about what success means to you. Again, right, don't come up with something so that you can look smart and good and you can feel special about yourself, right? I'm going to save starving children, I'm going to cure cancer and all that. That's what success is. And then you're sitting in a one-bedroom apartment like, holy crap, what happened here? I should have done that. My wife told me and this and that, right? So ask yourself honestly what success looks like. Dream it, imagine it, and accept it. For me, I have twin boys who are 6 years old, and people use the word life-altering quite frequently, and I'm pretty insensitive to most things. Having children was pretty life-altering. For me, priorities get reset because unconditional love is just a beautiful thing. Because when they turn around and they look at you and they think you're Superman and you're going to do this and that, it just humbles you because you're trying to rise to the occasion and do those kinds of things. So right now, I'm defining success more in terms of being a good parent, right? Building good teams, being honorable and fair to them, and making sure they're achieving their potential, etc. So regardless, defining success in those parameters is very important because, trust me, you will fail. And when you do, you can keep perspective in terms of saying, all right, you know what, the important things are still good. Because there was a time, I think there was a low point here, where I screwed up my health, my clients, and almost my marriage. And it was phenomenal. It was a trifecta, and I was doing pretty okay from a financial standpoint. I was pretty successful at work, but it didn't matter. None of that mattered. And I know that sounds very preachy right now, and you feel very bulletproof right now, and you are not. So something to keep in mind is to define success, hold on to it, and make sure that you're adhering to it when you actually do whatever you do in life. Okay, so I'll wrap up with this, right? This is a very loaded word. What is your purpose, right? And again, this is like the Miss World kind of question, right? But here's the interesting thing, right? As I think back, right, I was a loner, and dyslexia didn't help. So, and I used to stutter as well on top of it. So I kept to myself, and I didn't really like talking to a lot of people. And so over the years, what I landed up doing was think quite a bit about this. And if you guys get an opportunity to do so, you should read Clayton Christensen's article, Master of Innovation, right? So his article is called How to Measure Your Life. And it's a fantastic article. It's 4 pages. You guys read hundreds of pages of case studies, so you can read 4 pages. It'll be fun. It's an important article because it talks to you about, this Harvard Business School professor reflecting on graduates like you from a prestigious management institution about what he wished he had told them, right? And it's not about, Porter's laws of competitive forces and all that. It is more about people saying, what is it that defines purpose? What gives you purpose in life? And the reason why that is important is because that directly transcends into the kind of values that you have as well, right? Integrity, honesty, whatever, right? Being a good parent, or being a good friend, however you want to define it. And a combination of values and purpose is front and center. And it's very hard to define this. It took me years and years and years to understand, truly understand. I started with the Connie stuff, right? I was like, oh, I want to save the world, I want to do this, I want to do that, all those nonsense. I was saying things to make myself feel special so that I could tell my friends and brag about it and how cool I was. And ultimately, none of that was really sincere. To come up with something that was sincere and important to me took years. And as you guys have, I don't think you guys have any time, but when you have time, it is worth pondering over, is what is your purpose? What is important to you? What are the values that guide you? And here's why it's important, right? When you graduate, and you guys have 25 companies competing for you guys, pick the company that reflects your value system. So I will tell you that most often, people are unhappy because there is a complete mismatch between your value system and what the company does. And every single time, I would bet it's your fault and not the company's. The company is the company, right? It's a balance sheet. It is what it is. It's a culture that is built over the years. And no company sets out saying, I'm just going to be bad. I'm going to rob these people blind. Nobody sets out doing that. But, we start creating these projections of these companies and these firms that we work for where we say, oh, these guys are just nasty. And they're just bad. I don't want to work for them anymore. So figure out what your purpose is. Figure out what your values are. And when 25 companies are competing for you guys, find out which company and whose company's mission is actually valid, right? So for example, like PwC's purpose statement is to build trusted societies and solve important problems. So for me, that was very important because, they hit it on both accounts. And what I can tell you after interacting with, several leaders in the firm, that they actually mean it. Are they perfect? Absolutely not, right? I mean, I can pelt out a laundry list of character defects that PwC has, and I'm sure Karishma has already told you guys a lot about alcohol, but I mean, bottom line is that given that, and given what I want to do in life, that was a match made in heaven. And that's why I succeeded. There were dark days. There were days when I would get out of bed and say, oh my God, I don't want to go to work, I want to quit. This just sucks. I should be doing something else, and so on. But I go into work because for me, what I believe that I should be doing with my life matches up on most days and most times with what PwC wants to do. And that's what I would leave you with, right? I mean, more important than anything else in your life is to live your purpose, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, whatever, cybersecurity, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. It has to be what your purpose in life is. And a quick point of clarification here, right? It doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to save the country, right? Or, I'm going to do this, I'm going to save all the dolphins or something like that. That's not the point here. It is about making peace with who you are, right? Making money is not a bad thing. Lots of people make money. It's a good thing, right? And if nobody made money, guess what? You guys would not be in this room today. Because some rich alumni donated, and a lot of things had to happen for this day to happen, right? So I think it is important for you to face reality and define what you stand for and what you want your legacy to be today before you leave. And why today? Because you think you're busy now. Wait till you graduate and have a real job, right? You will not have time at all. And you will start making these small compromises every step of the way until you get to a point where you cannot identify yourself, right? And then that company is going to suck, and everybody's going to suck, and you're going to change companies. Doesn't matter, right? What happened was you didn't know who you were, and you landed up in a situation where you don't like who you have become. And that is the absolute worst thing you can do for yourself. So if I can leave you with anything, that's it. Which is basically think about what is it that you stand for? What is it that you value the most in your life? And go out and live that. And that's where, that's what I think is the best thing in the world, and that's what I want to wish for all of you. So, thank you. All right, questions, I guess. Sure. Go ahead. Can you tell me your name? I can't read the board.
My name is Madhav. Can you give me an instance where you had to trade off between your instincts and knowledge?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
An instance where you had to trade off between instincts and knowledge.
What are knowledge? Instincts and knowledge. I think always, because client service, unfortunately, right, there is no rule book. I mean, if you take industry, right, there are set processes in place in most cases, and there are certain understood ways of doing things. In consulting, it's not, right? You're sitting in a room, and odds are you've never seen this problem ever before. And they're throwing, so a good example is, so recently, at a client of ours that Karishma and I have worked at, they kept throwing more money at us, and they were not doing very well. They're not financially very healthy, and it's just a tough environment. And as they were throwing more money at us, I made a conscious, so my knowledge told me that I should stay there because they're giving the firm a lot of business, and I should just keep doing what we're doing there. Instinctively, I knew it was a bad idea. It was a horrible idea, in my opinion, because it was killing our teams. This is a company that was not doing very well. And, I followed through. Now, how you train your gut or instinct or whatever you call it is experience, though, right? And that's where experience helps more than anything else. Several times that I have made fun of people that I work for, and I've said they're completely worthless. And the only thing that people who have more experience than us is experience. And what that trains is gut, right? A good experience, right? I mean, it's just, can't punch a ball every day and say that's good experience. I mean, if you're doing something valuable over a period of time, that trains your gut, and that gut helps you make good decisions. In fact, I would say almost always you should trust your gut if you have a well-trained gut, well-trained instinct over knowledge. Because knowledge has the luxury, right, of being very pure. Life is just really corrupt and hard. And I don't mean to make it negative, but it's just the reality of it, right? And so you have to instinctively do what you think is right, again, because that's what you believe in. And let's say things don't go the way you plan, at least you have your conscience to thank, and you can say, well, I did what I could, right, because I believed in it. So, did that answer your question? Somewhat? Okay. What would answer your question there? No, it's fine. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I have no idea, so that's why I was asking.
And it's tough, right? I mean, I never used knowledge over instinct. Let me put it that way. I have never, ever in consulting used knowledge over instinct. I mean, maybe when I was early on, when I was an associate, I was told that, you do certain things certain ways. As a manager, I've never used knowledge over instinct. It's always been instinct over knowledge. So, go ahead. Ashish?
Yes, Ashish. So how's been your switch from middle management
to partner level? So what kind of changes, adjustments, or let's say increase in knowledge or skills you have to make?
Okay, so two-part question, right? First, what has changed? So, as a partner, you're a part owner in the company. So there are about 3,000 partners in the US. So the way it works is, at the end of the, I don't draw a salary anymore. So whatever profits PwC makes, they distribute among the partners, and so you get cash distribution. If you had a bad year, you had a bad year. I pay for my own health insurance. I pay for everything myself. There is no 401k contribution. And you always know it when you sit there and complain, oh, this dinner sucks, the firm sucks, well, you're the firm, right? So there's nothing, so that is the biggest change, I would say. Very tactically speaking, I have people responsibilities. I always had people responsibilities, but now I have comp responsibilities. I have P&L responsibilities. I'm running an actual business. I have office responsibilities. My client delivery duties have changed. I'm not responsible for day-to-day management of clients. My interactions are more at the executive level, and it's more about driving revenue, profitable growth, etc. So second part of your question about transitioning from middle management, they won't make you a partner unless you're performing at that level. So part of the test is, are you performing at that level? The trick is they won't pay you the money, so you'll be performing as a partner even though you'll have the title of a manager. So for me, the transition was not too much because it's just I was doing that, and I'm required to do that. Now I have the title. I think the biggest, I was telling your friends earlier at lunch, is that the biggest difference is the freedom, right? I mean, as a partner, now I'm allowed to do whatever I want within reason. Obviously, when I became, I can't speak to, I think it's different from a corporate executive because I have several friends who are corporate executives, and the difference is that when you do cross the line and become a partner, it is very different. There's no, junior partner, senior partner, etc. There's only partner. And they treat you, they show you the balance sheet, they show you all the realities of the business. And that's a little unnerving and grounding because, for example, I'm aware of all the lawsuits that are against PwC. I'm aware of all the settlements that have happened over the years, right? So, and I'm aware of how much profit we're going to generate, what the pipeline is, etc. So those kinds of realities get given to you as well. So, but there is, but I welcome it. I'm enjoying it because I think, like I said, for me, I have hated. I don't like micromanaging. I don't like being micromanaged, and so the very fact that I have the freedom to do what I want, and there is the freedom to do what I want, is just liberating for me more than anything else. So. You don't have a name tag, so you have to tell me your name.
So I'm Maya. So given your background in technology, right? Nowadays we talk a lot about disruptive technologies and how it is changing business. From a consulting standpoint, how important it is for a consultant to be, very aware or ahead of the pack in terms of technology, and what kind of depths should he actually swim in?
Great question. I think two parts, right? So the first part is, people ask us, who do you fear the most, right, from a competitive standpoint? We have our traditional competitors, Deloitte, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. We have traditional ways of competing with them, we'll continue to do that. We're terrified of the technology companies. Because if you take Ford and Uber, for example, right, Uber has completely disrupted the automobile industry, not so much the service industry, right? Because now people don't own cars. Now Ford has to rethink how they manufacture automobiles. So I honestly don't know who is going to disrupt consulting. Maybe Google's going to come up with some magic red button that they push and they don't need consultants anymore, right? So in that way, yes, we are terrified and we try to stay on top. The way, it's impossible to predict what is going to be disruptive because there are several intelligent people, I'm sure including your professors who do that on a daily basis. So we are pretty tied in there and we try to understand what is disruptive. We look at trends, like I told you, so we are actively looking at trends. From what you can do standpoint, so that's what I meant by interlock, right? If you're serving a client, understand their business. Disruptions are typically industry-centric. So for example, retailers, right? So my clients, they joke about retailers being tailors now. What that means is they are tailoring experiences for their customers so much that they cannot sell an off-the-shelf product at all now anymore. So I try to understand what technologies are disrupting retailers. For example, digital payments, so Apple Pay and all this, so that is important for me. Somebody in the healthcare space would care about something like high trust. So it is going to be very difficult for you to know everything across the board, but once you understand that intersection that you want to play in, I would try to understand what is disrupting that industry and focus on those technologies. But yeah, by no means should you as a manager just disconnect yourself from technology to a point where you don't understand what is digital payments, for example, right? So that's what I would do.
My name is Tridisha.
Hey, Trish.
I think a question that I would have for you is, what are the 3 skills that you would want people to develop who want to get into the consulting?
Okay, let me think about this. So I'll tell you what you don't have to develop. And then I'll get to work because it'll give me some time to think about what you have to develop. So what you don't have to develop is don't get obsessive about technology skills, right? I mean, so because I'm not saying that you guys are going to go off and become technology consultants because of what I do. When I say technical expertise, right, it transcends technology. And I try to. So the best way to explain this is, let's say you're an auditor, right? Doing audits is a technical skill. That's your skill. That's what you do. So don't worry so much about that, right? In consulting, I think the 3 most important. The first one would be your capacity to listen. People who are very successful as consultants, and this is how you get measured as you progress, by the way. It's not so much about how well you do your job. Initially it will be that, and then it will be about how well your team does, and then it will be about how well the firm does. That's how I get measured, right? It is not so much about, oh, Gautam is so awesome at cyber, everybody likes Gautam. Nope, it's not that. It's about how is Gautam bringing the rest of the firm to a client, right? How am I bringing a strategy consulting guy? So we went and we acquired Booz and Company to compete with McKinsey 3-4 years back. So we did strategy. So how do I bring those guys in, etc. Right? So what that means is you have to sit down and you have to listen to what your client is saying very carefully, because most often you're so smart that you're already framing the questions before your client can. And I'm very guilty of that. And that is probably the single most inhibiting factor in your career. Because they are probably talking to you about 1,000 different problems. And you're just focusing on that one thing that you do. And you want to sell that work and you don't care about anything else. Whereas they probably have serious infrastructure issues and they're talking to you about that. Maybe they're expanding in China and they're talking to you about that. And you're not paying attention to that at all. And all that you're hearing is, oh, okay, I got to sell this, I got to sell this, I got to sell this. So listen, right? And more importantly, when you listen, you actually truly understand the problem and you can solve the problem. Because consulting is all about customizing, right? There is no single offering that you can take to every single client. Even within a client, you have to customize it. So the best way to customize it is to listen. So the second thing I would say is be open-minded, which means that, a lot of things and people have to come together for a consulting business to work. Right? What I mean to say is people with very diverse backgrounds. It's like this classroom right now, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys, one of your classmates earlier was telling me about healthy arguments that you guys have. And you will have this as a business, right? And you will have executives that are your peers that do not agree with what you're saying. Or they will be doing things that you think is total BS. Like, they just make PowerPoints, I do so many important things. You have to be open-minded because you cannot connect those dots unless you're open-minded. A third most important thing I think is true for anything. I don't think it's true for consulting. And I'm sure there are 10 more important things, but you asked me for 3, is resilience, right? So the most successful consultants are the most resilient ones. So, if you take, it doesn't matter which firm, McKinsey, whatever. The chairman of the firm or managing directors there are not people who are the smartest people in the room. They probably never are. They are people who have been through a lot and who can take a beating, right? And what that means is they will stand the ground even in the hardest of situations. So resilience is very important. Resilience in the face of adversity, in the face of failure, in the face of several other things. As a consultant is very important. Because with that comes your ability to adapt. Because you can, that's why I said don't get attached to a technical skill or a skill. Let's call it a skill. Because your skill might become defunct. The skill that I started with, my career at PwC, has become 5 or 6 times defunct. I don't even remember what I did the first time. So if you're not resilient and adapting, then you will get phased out.
You talked about water being the next big thing in which everyone is focusing on. So how does PwC as a consultant is working on these water technologies? Of course, tech companies are coming with technologies of desalination, water treatment. So what is PwC as a consultant doing in this world?
Great question, right? So water is one of the, I'm not saying the most important, resources. So just a little bit of background. I'll digress a little bit to answer your question, just to give you some background. So PwC's strategy is strategy through execution, believe it or not, which is basically they want to compete in all those 3 spaces. So they contradicted what I told you. They went off and they acquired Booz & Company to compete in McKinsey. They acquired Banning Point. They acquired PRTM. They acquired Diamond Consulting. They acquired some smaller companies. So they want to compete across the board with everybody. So in the case of water, right, one of the things that I help with is sensor tampering, right? So there is a lot of regulation in place to make sure that water is not being black marketed and hoarded, etc., not being used and resold. So how this is done is there are several sensors that actually capture information, right? And this information is not tamper-proof. So what cyber technologies do is we implement and we provide a strategy for clients to figure out how do you make sure that the data that is actually being reported back by these sensors and these inspectors is fairly accurate. That is one thing that we do. The other thing is my strategy friends, the McKinsey kind of guys, they actually sit and define strategies for water management, right? Which is more about, just like you go to an oil company and they have different ways of managing oil rigs. These guys talk about how do you go after reserves of water, how do you protect it, how do you make sure they're not polluted, etc., and how do you make sure that water is actually reaching enough places. So it's a huge supply chain issue. So those guys solve that as well. So we don't actually sit and help them build technologies to purify water. It's more about how do you manage water as an asset. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Sure. Go ahead.
So what do you like and dislike the most in your job?
I could get paid more. No. I'll start with what I like most, right? Because I have very strong opinions about this. I have thought about leaving PwC several times, and 10 days before I got admitted into the partnership, I almost quit PwC. And what kept me at PwC was the people, and it's still the people. I love my teams. I think they're a very big part of my life. They're my family, and so the joy of seeing somebody grow and flourish and achieve their potential and exceed it, hopefully, is the most rewarding experience for me and drives a lot of my purpose in life. And PwC is a pretty terrific place to do that. I mean, I'm not going to say it's the only place in the world to do that. Well, I will, but I find it a great place to do that because I have done so many experiments in team building there. Any other company should have fired me at least 1,000 times. But they let me do that and let me become a better people manager because of that. And that's what I love day in and day out. I keep in touch with folks who worked with me. And, because whether they choose to be with us or not, because it's exciting to see them go to exciting things. And I learn quite a bit from them. So I think that's the best part of my job. And coincidentally, that's why I'm in consulting, because we don't peddle products, we don't peddle service, what we sell is our people. And so they are our commodity, and for me, I can't think of anything more valuable than that, right? What I don't like about my job, I'm trying to think. So, obviously travel can be a little hard, right? I'm a young parent, so my wife works, and she's got a full-time job, and she's an important person in her own way. And just getting on a plane on Monday mornings and coming back on Thursday evenings and pretending that life just goes on is not easy. So that's definitely hard. The other thing that I would say is hard is it's not an easy lifestyle. I mean, the biggest advantage is everybody in this room is ultra ambitious, I can tell. There is no way you can experience the kind of progression, at least that's my hypothesis. Granted, it's prejudiced. As quickly as you do in consulting anywhere else. It's just not possible. And when I say progress, right, it's not about titles that you accumulate, that's different. I'm talking about the kind of experiences and exposure you get, the diversity that you have in consulting. It is impossible to get it somewhere else because, why would they take a 20-something-year-old kid and put me in front of boards and executives and have me learn that way? Right? I mean, it was baptism by fire. So, but the downside is that it is quite stressful. It can take a toll. I mean, I showed you guys that graph that I tried to plot, and you can have some dark days because you're working 60, 70 odd weeks sometimes. And but what I learned over the course of my career is you manage the firm or the firm manages you. So, once you devise, now I think I have a better way of managing the firm, so that's no longer a problem, but no stress is there. So I would say that's definitely a challenge. Go ahead.
I'm Nikhil, of course. It's about managing people. You would, of course, have highly talented and highly competitive people in your organization. How easy or difficult is it to align their competitiveness towards the organization's goal?
It's very difficult, right? So that's why I'm sort of trying to program you guys to make sure that you're lining up your ambitions, your purpose, your values with what the firm is, so that we're indoctrinating you guys when you're here. Before we have to do that in teams, but that never works, right? I mean, you guys are going to go do whatever you want. But what I do is have conversations like this every day. Or I sit down with them and I tell them what is it that they want to do with their life, right? I mean, it can be curing cancer, it can be, building the next important thing in life, right? Making an electric bus. All of which are worthy goals, but you cannot do them in PwC, right? Whatever I can make happen in PwC, I try to. I never let people leave because of money, because of work-life balance, because of opportunities. Those things can all be addressed. I actually recommend people leave when they are fundamentally different, and what they want in life is fundamentally different from what we want, right? You can be competitive and you can want very different things, right? Now, within each other, right, when they're trying to do this game theory thing, when they're trying to eliminate each other, I think it's the importance of teaching. So my teams are well balanced. So I have a good balance of people across those different acumens. So when I look at that picture, right, business, global, technical relationships, I seldom find people who are actually good across the board, but I try to build teams that are good across the board, if that makes sense, right? So there might be a very strong technical person who's trying to work on their business acumen. But I have a very strong business acumen. So what they realize is, yes, they are competitive, but they're not really competing against each other because their roles are so different on the team. And, in the grand scheme of things, they can't succeed by themselves. So, and sometimes they don't listen to me, and they're like, you know what, man, I think I can, and I let them go. And I've been proved wrong sometimes, and I've been proved right many times. So that's how I handle it, more than anything else. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay. Hey.
So, since people are very important for a consulting firm like PwC, what would you say is the most important thing that PwC would look for in a potential consultant while recruiting someone?
Good point. So I can tell you what I look for. I look for, right? I mean, so I hardly ever pay attention to people's resumes. I read them. I mean, I'm totally insensitive to the fact that you accumulated quite a bit of knowledge and experience. But I try to ask them open-ended questions. Not what are your strengths and weaknesses. I hate those type of questions, but because we all know that your biggest weakness is that you work very hard. So I think I think, so for example, I try to give them puzzles, logical puzzles to solve, and I give them real situations. So for example, one of the common questions I ask associates, I would not ask somebody at your level, is I would ask them to design, so I asked somebody to design a spice rack for somebody who's visually impaired. It sounds very weird for a consulting company, but it's important because those are the kinds of problems I get asked, right? I go to a boardroom and they don't say, oh, whatever you did for that cyber thing at that client, why don't you do it for me? It's never that. They're always special. They're always different. And their problems are so unique, right? So, and I have 15, 20 minutes to react. If I'm sitting there and if I'm saying, well, you know what, let me table that. I'll come back in 2 weeks and with a deck that's going to explain that. They'll be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to go talk to Lloyd. So that is what I need people to do, right? People to show me that they can, to your question, think on their feet, be open-minded, etc. And there are several ways to test that. That's what we look for in candidates. And I also look for work ethic, because, like I said, I don't really care much for what your skill set level is. I really don't care, and that might just be me. I care more about what kind of personality you have and what your work ethic is, because that dictates to me how quickly you'll pick up a skill. Because if you really care about doing the right thing by clients, then you will figure it out. So I'm not too worried. So that's how my interviews are very open-ended, like this answer, and I just have to feel like that person will fit in our culture, and which is basically being all of those things that I told you earlier, and I can tell, right? I mean, over the years when talking to people whether they'll be a good fit or not. So if you were to consider a career at PwC, right, what I would focus on is thinking about those different acumens, right, business, global, technical, and relationships, and think about what you can bring to the table across those 4 things, right? The other caveat here real quick is, very tactically speaking, I'm a US partner, right? I am not a PwC India partner. And there are distinctions here because we're a global network of firms, but the US firm is not the same balance sheet as the India firm. That makes sense. We're all separate entities. PwC India partners are different from PwC US. So, I would welcome conversations about you guys joining PwC, but remember that, I can definitely talk to PwC people in PwC India, but I would rather have you guys in the US. So, all right.
Hi Gautam, my name is Vijay.
Hey.
So the thing that you mentioned at the end, I had a question regarding that, regarding the US versus India PwC. So how has Mr. Donald Trump affected your business? So let's say I'm an aspirant to get into the US PwC, right? So how feasible do you think it is for at the current moment?
So we talked about this earlier on. Okay, so I'm trying to say this politically correctly, so I'm going to phrase this in my head. So PwC has very, very, very taken a very strong stance in terms of diversity and equal opportunity employment, etc. I don't care, and the firm doesn't, and I can say this with absolute certainty, where you were born. You could literally be from Mars and be green and have tentacles growing out of your head. If you're good, you're good. We don't care. We don't care where you're born, you went to school. We care about what you do and who you are, right? So I can tell you with absolute certainty, and I'm not certain of most things in life, that PwC will never discriminate, right? Okay, so that's point number 1. And I can tell you that I don't say this about my competitors, but I will say that most of them are decent people, and they will do the same thing, right? Now, the reality is that we are not the government, but we have ways to influence the government. Now, the other thing is, you have been in India long enough to realize that there is rhetoric, and then there is reality, right? Politicians get excited. There's a lot of theatrics that happens, and does that actually translate into policy is a different thing. They take H-1B, for example, right now, right? There is nothing that has been done that is net new to H-1B. Not a single policy change. They are basically enforcing the rules and regulations that H-1B is supposed to enforce now, right? So you could argue that, well, it was more lenient before, etc., but the rules were there, right? There is not a single law that has been passed that said, you know what, all those IT guys from India, we're gonna like send them back home. No. It'll never pass through Congress, it'll never pass through Senate, because it's a democracy at the end of the day. Regardless of what President Trump thinks and doesn't think, I have a lot of faith in the legislative system, and I have more faith in the lobbying system, right? So companies like PwC, Amazon, Google, Facebook, etc., run on the backs of incredibly intelligent Asians like you guys sitting in this room. They are not going to let Trump pass a law that says, you know what, not going to welcome people in. Now, of course, there's going to be more stringent measures. Now, if we're talking about you guys, right, you're graduating from one of the most prestigious management institutions in the world. So, versus a boutique that is trying to game the system so that they can block H1Bs. In a way, I would say that what he's trying to do is going to help you. It is going to make the playing field more level and fair so that the right talent enters the country. See what I'm saying? So if, let's say a boutique blocks 40 H1B visas for a Java programmer. I think what Trump's argument is, are you really telling me there are no Java programmers in the United States? Why are we not building Java programmers? If we're saying we're going to bring an elite manager in because of their specific skill set, I don't really see anything that Trump has said or done that is going to prevent that. So that would be my 2 cents around that. Again, like I said, we all get really excited and emotional about everything that our political leaders say, but how much is actually real, right? How much public policy has actually been enacted is how you grow yourself, and that's what I would do. Okay, fair?
Thank you.
Sure.